Hi, thanks for joining me for Bible study. And we're in the book of Hebrews, chapter 4. So, Hebrews chapter 4. Let's jump right in. I'm going to read the last verse of chapter 3. The writer of the Hebrews did not put the chapter breaks in, and it does help explain what his next thoughts are in chapter 4. Hebrews chapter 3, verse 19 says, "So we see that they could not enter in because of unbelief. Therefore, since a promise remains of entering his rest, let us fear lest any of you seem to have come short of it. For indeed the gospel was preached to us as well as to them, but the word which they heard did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in those who heard it. For we who have believed do enter that rest, as he has said, So I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. Although the works were finished from the foundation of the world. For he has spoken in a certain place of the seventh day in this way. And God rested on the seventh day from all his works. And again in this place, they shall not enter my rest. Since therefore it remains that some must enter it, those to whom it was first preached did not enter because of disobedience. Again, he designates a certain day, saying in David, Today, after such a long time, as it has been said, Today, if you will hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. For if Joshua had given them rest, then he would not afterward have spoken of another day. There remains therefore a rest for the people of God. For he who has entered his rest has himself also ceased from his works, as God did from his. Let us therefore be diligent to enter that rest, lest anyone fall according to the same example of disobedience." So, as we read through this, it is a continuation of the pastor of the Hebrews' sermon that he's doing from Psalm 95. Today, if you will hear his voice, don't harden your hearts in the rebellion. And it finishes with, So I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. Going back to, which the Psalm 95 is like a sermon, a song, though, reflecting back on what happened in the days of Moses, centuries before that. And so the Bible building on itself. And so last time we were seeing where it was because of their unbelief, they missed out. Because of their unbelief, they were hardened by sin and they refused to see the evidence of God's goodness. And so distrusted and missed out on the promised land. Entire generation killed in the wilderness. Now the writer of Hebrews wants to elaborate on there's something more going on than just the promised land when he says rest. He's talking about something spiritual, and he's applying it that way as well. And so now as we go back through this, you see where their unbelief caused them to miss out on the eternal rest of the soul. They refuse to trust God and have that kind of rest. And he says the opposite is true. Those who do believe in God do enter into that rest. Those who trust God enjoy that rest. Something that God has already provided. And so we see here where in the Bible, for believers, God's rest can be looked at in some different ways, elaborated on. One is that reliance on God's provision. And the Sabbath rest was a way of demonstrating a reliance on God's provision. You work 6 days and you trust Him that He will provide all week by taking one day off to do none of the labor, none of the toil. The Sabbath. And that's reflected back from Genesis 2, when, after 6 days of creating everything that exists, Genesis 2 reads, "Thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished, and on the seventh day God ended his work which he had done. He rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he rested from all his work which God had created and made." And so he just ceased. He'd done what he wanted to do, and he took a day to demonstrate to us what that would look like. And I've heard it taught that that word for rest there also kind of carries the idea of nesting. You just kind of enjoy your space, enjoy what you have done. But it's that reliance on God's provision, that God has done enough. And in that is also the picture of his peace, his shalom, that everything is the way it should be, which is as it is seen there in Genesis 2 as well. And so when God brought the children of Israel out of Egypt, that was one of his first gifts to them, was the command to take a Sabbath. So in Exodus 20, when he gave the 10 Commandments, you remember, number 4, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shall you labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work. You, nor your son, nor your daughter, your male servant, your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who's within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the seventh day and hallowed it. And so, bound up in that commandment is going back to the creation principle of taking a day of rest. I was visiting with a pastor friend of mine, and from when the kids get out of school Friday to Saturday noon, that's their Sabbath. They don't do any work-related work in that time period. Spend time with God, spend time as a family, but not doing the work of the college ministry. And so that picture, I'm just going to have to trust God to take care of it during that time period. And so reliance on God's provision and resting in his peace, his shalom. Now, we move forward and we see where Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." And there is that picture, and it's followed up, that promise of rest, that you don't have to work so hard picture, where Jesus says he is the Lord of the Sabbath. Because the Sabbath stopped being a gift and became a burden with all the rules that had become associated with it. And nobody could survive. And Jesus says, no, that's not what the Sabbath was made for. Sabbath wasn't made to be a series of rules and a burden, but to be a time of peace and a time of reliance on God's provision. And so he is our Sabbath. And that brings us towards the ultimate work that had tied into that. Wasn't the day-to-day survival, but it was trying to keep all these rules and the thinking that that's what God expected, when our confidence of salvation is in what Jesus accomplished. And then we obey out of love, not out of indebtedness. I'm not saved by my works. I'm saved by his works. And so you see, that's another aspect of relying on God's provision and trusting in his peace, is that confidence of salvation. I'm not saved by my works. Jesus says he will provide. He is the one who takes care of that. And then lastly, included in that is the assurance of a future heavenly home where there's no more sin, no more toil, no more pain. And that brings us to Revelation 14, 12 through 13. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. Then I heard a voice from heaven saying to me, Write, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works follow them. And so the result of their works follows. There is the reward yet to come, but they get to cease from the striving. Remember in that picture of Psalm 46, be still and know that I am the Lord. That's when we see his provision, when we see his peace, and take confidence in his salvation. Where, like God promised in Leviticus, that he'll give peace in the land. You shall be able to lie down, rest, and none shall make you afraid. I will rid the land of evil beasts. The sword won't go through your land. And then in that picture of confidence in God and his provision, think of Psalm 46, 6 through 7. I'm not going to say the word rest either, but listen for the word peace. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. So where's that resting in him? When the fears and doubts arise, keep praying, asking God to give that peace, resting on his provision, his peace, taking confidence and assurance of the good finish. So as we read through Hebrews chapter 4, so I took us on a detour so that I could bring us back to Hebrews 4. He says, so we see they didn't experience that kind of rest because of unbelief. They chose to toil in the wilderness. They chose more testing and trials. And so God says, you can still come and enjoy this kind of rest with me, an eternal rest, the writer of Hebrews says. And it comes through believing the good news, the gospel message of Jesus, that he's our rest. And so he says, God's already finished his work. It's up to us to rest in his work. And you saw where, like in verses 5 of chapter 4, he quoted that thing from Genesis 2 that we looked at. That he rested on the seventh day from all his works. And so he says, there's going to be some who enter it. Wouldn't you like to be one of them? They didn't because of distrust, disobedience. And he says, but today's the day to start experiencing it. Just as David said. David was a long time after Moses. Centuries after Moses. It says, today if you'll hear his voice, don't harden your hearts. Trust. And he says, and the fact that he's saying this in the time of David means that the promised land that the Hebrews inherited under Joshua, there in verse 8, and I know some of your translations may not say Joshua, but it is that reminder that Jesus was named for that Old Testament hero, because both of them, their name means salvation. The Lord is salvation. He says if Joshua had given them rest, then God would not have spoken afterward of another day offering rest. Joshua got them in the promised land, and they got a taste of that. But there were still all the enemies. There was still more work to be done. It wasn't the eternal rest. And David says it's still being offered for those who will trust in God. And so he says, there remains a rest for the people of God. to trust him. Now, this is the point in which I say that can be challenging, because sometimes it's really hard when there's turmoil, when there's big looming dark clouds, and you don't see how God can provide. You don't see how God can fix this. I'm experiencing some of those even now, and it's challenging. And so we go back to praying to God and asking him to help my distrust, my doubts, to turn into trust and faith, to get us through these challenges. Remembering that I can rely on God's provision. He's a good Father, and that I can trust and have peace even when it's in turmoil. I can have shalom. And ultimately, I know I have confidence in God's salvation. He's the one who's saving, and he has a better finish for us, an assurance of that future heavenly home. No more sin, no more toil, no more pain. It'll be all worth it one day. Now we're going to continue that thought a little farther next week as we see where I can come to Christ because of how he's going to provide. And one of his provisions is to show me where my weaknesses are. But I appreciate you joining me for these little Bible studies, and we'll plan on doing it again next week. God bless. God keep you. Thanks for joining.